Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen nabiyyina Muhammadi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'du, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to FiqHour. As we have said, the plan for today is to talk about a topic which was raised a few days ago, and that topic is our theme for today, which has been labeled, and I put this in speech marks yesterday, on Islamic feminism, whatever that means, analyzing feminist interpretations of Islamic texts and traditions, the struggle for gender equality within Muslim majority societies, and the role of women in Islamic religious and intellectual history. Okay, so quite a mouthful, quite a detailed topic to talk about. I think in order to speak about it, let me just give some context. Up until arguably the First World War, maybe by extension, the Second World War, then women in Western societies were no different really to women in Eastern societies, in that they did not play much of a public role. They tended to be homemakers. The societies were based pretty much around families. Religion played a key part in society, and religion had this kind of hierarchical structure in which the man was put as responsible for the family, head of the family. And you saw, for example, like we see in the royal family, that the family lineage went through the son as it was transferred over. And therefore, this was the norm. This has been a norm for centuries, for millennia. Let's go all the way back in when we lived very simple lives, either as farmers or as collectors, hunters. Then what you'd find predominantly is the male would be out hunting, collecting, farming, doing the arduous, hard labor work. And the women tended to remain at home in order to look after the children. Why? Because they biologically gave birth to the children. They had an affinity, a closeness to the children. They had a natural affection and love for the children. And therefore, you saw this natural structure exist, has done for millennia, since humans have walked on the surface of the earth. That has been the structure. And of course, there's been unusual individuals that have come across. We know, for example, there are many men that have gone by that have preferred to live within the kind of home structure and prefer not to work and things like that. But they've been pushed out to work. And similarly, there's been women that have preferred to be more outgoing and wanting men to stay behind. So this is a norm. We are speaking about generalizations here. But after the First World War, and the reason why women, why I mentioned World War I and World War II, was because in World War I, because many men within Europe went to fight the Great Wars, is referred to, and obviously many men lost their lives. But during the war itself, there weren't anybody doing the things that men used to do. The work that used to be done, the factories, the mills, the basics like delivering milk, the really simple things like that. Those weren't happening. So the women were encouraged to leave the homemaking responsibilities and come out into society and maintain, basically run the countries. Otherwise, the men are not there. They're busy fighting. They're busy flying planes. They're busy, doing X, Y, Z. So therefore, these sorts of things we find was the kind of norm. When the men returned from war, then obviously the men wanted to carry on taking their original jobs, and obviously they prefer their wives to be at home preparing food for them when they get in, looking after the children, cleaning the house, the usual sort of responsibilities that existed. So the men returned back to the workplace. However, it wasn't that long before Second World War comes along. Second World War comes along, and the same thing happens again. The men are back into war. the 5-6 years that the war lasts, or the wars last for, again, a massive war across Europe. And you find, for example, again, the women are now brought back out again. They are now doing exactly the same sort of task the gentlemen were doing. And obviously this carries on for some time until obviously the men start to return. Again, many men are killed. Many men are injured. More men are injured than they are killed. And obviously when you're injured, there's very little you can do in terms of work. You're now bedridden. You're now you're going to have to sit down, do nothing. This time, however, there was a change in society. The women weren't too happy to go back into living a life being more housebound. They prefer this little bit of freedom that they got. They prefer this little bit of opportunity to be able to be out in the workplace. And this time there was more of a push to continue to do that. This push carried on for a decade or so until we start to get to the late 50s, early 60s. And that's when you see the huge kind of sex revolution. Okay. It timed in around the same sort of time when the morning after pill was discovered as well. And the only reason why the morning after pill was discovered around that time, because there was a need. There was a lot of illicit relationships taking place now. Why? Because men and women were now in the workplace. More women were pushing to be in the workplace. So there was an increase in those type of, again, we're generalizing. I'm not saying here that that never happened prior to that. Of course it happened. We know that, even if you go back all the way to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it happened. We know that even if you go before even the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it happened. It's been happening since the dawn of men and women have existed. Zina has taken place. There's no doubt about it. There would be no need for the laws of zina if it didn't exist. Obviously, there's conversations of adultery in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. So that's going back several, a few thousand years. So that's existed since humans have existed. However, the difference was obviously in the late 50s and 60s was now those barriers that had existed where men and women were somewhat separate, meaning women tended to be housebound. So the only time zina would take place is if a man was going to that house. Maybe he was a laborer or a builder or a gardener or a carpenter or a milkman. And you hear those usual jokes that used to go around in the 60s and 70s of the milkman and the postman coming around, because they were the only men who ended up going to houses where women were, whereas women weren't going out. But as we saw in the 60s and the 70s, more and more women were coming out into the workplace, and there was an increase now. This also led to obviously the breakdown in the marriage, because now women had more than one man's attention potentially, whereas a woman was restricted to one man. But now obviously she had more options, and as a result she wasn't too happy with the kind of attention she was getting at home compared to the type of attention she was getting at work. So therefore the arguments started and marriages started to break down. So you see lots of different trends taking place now, 60s moving into 70s and into the 80s. Let's now kind of add the Muslim factor into all of this. So when we saw, for example, the Muslims who first arrived here, let's just use UK as an example. When they first arrived here in the UK, then it was only the men who arrived first. And this came about because, again, going back to the 1950s, 1960s, there was a reduction in the number of men, obviously due to the Second World War. Similarly, there was an increase in more professional jobs, and the kind of lower paid, low class jobs, there weren't many people taking those jobs up. So the Commonwealth, which existed, which were basically those countries which had been colonized by the British Empire, those countries which had been colonized by the British Empire became what was referred to as the Commonwealth. And now the governments said, right, you can now freely come here to England. You don't need any, visa requirements, nothing at all. If you're part of the Commonwealth, you're entitled to come here. So there was a huge drive in the 50s, especially, and in the 60s, of people coming from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, many Muslim countries across here to the UK. There was obviously the act, the Immigration Act, I think 1962, I think, but don't quote me on it, in which that was reduced tremendously because they realized, my goodness, they're coming here on shiploads, quite literally, and soon we're not going to be able to deal with this huge growth of influx of immigrants. But that didn't stop anything, as we know. So the men settled here in the 50s and even in the 60s. And obviously the aim was that there was a view, like Dick Whittington had this view, that the streets of England were paved with gold. But when they arrived here, obviously the streets of England weren't paved with gold, quite the opposite, and they weren't necessarily paying millions of pounds as a person working in the steel factories or in the textile factories. So it was very little money, and there was just enough money to look at, pay the rent, buy some food, eat some food, get some clothes, as a famous saying was going, and then try to save more. So it was becoming quite challenging. Time that people had stayed there, it became such that they now started to get and obviously start to bring wives over. So when the wives came over, obviously they tended not to be able to speak English. They were quite happy to be yani they were quite happy to be housewives because that's what they were back in their villages that they came from, and they prefer to stay in their own little communities because literally they were a community moving from one country to another country, a foreign country. They didn't understand the language. The religion was different to their religion, and you started to get these little kind of enclaves occurring where you just got Muslims living together wherever they may be, the Burnleys, the Bradfords, the Oldhams, the Rochdales, the Blackburns, the Battleys, the Dewsburys, the Birminghams, the East Londons, and all the rest of it. You started to get Muslim community kind of growing there, and languages. And you found, you also found, somebody ringing me whilst I'm live. You also found, for example, that there was a view of kind of us and them. And the Muslim women, because we're talking about Islamic feminism, So what we found was that the Muslim women tended to stay in their own cultural settings. It was a taboo to go outside of those cultural settings. It was as though you kind of sold out on your heritage. It was as though you sold out on your legacy. How would your father think, and how would your mother think? Those kind of social taboos kept Muslim women in particular still accepting those traditional roles. However, move on a couple of generations, obviously the children that were being born were being sent to state schools in particular, and there was now a time now to sort of educate and push obviously the British identity, the British culture. And you started to find now young girls in particular sort of thinking, well, actually, you know what? I quite like what's being offered here. Okay. I quite like what's being offered here. I can, chase an education. I can go to college. I can go to university. They're giving me ideas of aspiration that I can become an astronaut. I can become a doctor. I can become a teacher. And what we found, which was the case, obviously, throughout, not just for Muslim women coming here, but also for women generally, was that the role as a career person was given a bigger status than the role of a person staying at home. So it was looked down upon if you chose to become a mother. It was looked down upon if you wanted to raise the next generation. And instead, if you became a woman who was pursuing a career, that was looked up at, that you are, you are free thinking, you are modern, you are intelligent, you're leading the way. All these kind of positive terms were used, and all these negative terms were used with those people who chose to stay at home. So naturally, we don't like to do something bad. We want to be seen by the public to be doing something good. So we saw women wanting to aspire to those roles. It also did not help, unfortunately, that many of those people who had come across from the Pakistanis, the Indias, and the Bangladeshis, they were unfortunately not fully aware of their own faith. So instead of saying that a woman had a choice in who she would marry, there was now this some level of compulsion to say, oh, you're marrying X, you're marrying Y, you're marrying Z, whether you like it or not. He's my nephew, he's your mum's nephew, or he's this person, that person, or the other person. And we're going to marry you in Pakistan, we're going to marry you in India, we're going to marry you in Bangladesh. Now, we had this big culture thing. You've got this young girl who's growing up, who's already through a little bit of an identity crisis. She's trying to understand who she is. She's got this different kind of culture when she comes home. She's trying to connect with her parents, but they're kind of, a little bit different. She connects very with her friends at school because they're very much like her. And now suddenly she's been allowed to kind of pretty much meet her friends, relax with her friends, go out with her friends, eat with her friends, celebrate birthdays with her friends. And suddenly, which is the key aspect of her life, which is who she chooses to marry, is now being decided for her. So you now get this breakdown in the family structure. You get some girls who just kind of think this is Islamically right, so I'm just going to do it. And then they have regret later on in life, in their 30s and 40s, and they look back and think, why did I do that? I wanted to do so many things. I could have studied, I could have done this, I could have that. Instead, I took those steps, and now look where I am. Okay. Or the others who felt, actually, you know what? I'm not going to tolerate that. I'm not going to accept that. And I'm going to make my own way in life. And they decided to separate from the family. They decided to separate from society and make their own way in life. So you're starting to now getting these cracks forming. Obviously the cracks are forming because of the fact that people who have come from the Pakistans, the Indias, and the Bangladesh, I'm only referring to them because that's where the majority of people have come from. Obviously, Muslims come from, Middle East, African nations, Far East. But I'm just using those three countries particularly because that's where the majority of Muslims who live in the UK now, the diaspora from the Indian subcontinent. So you're getting this kind of breakdown now. And what happens is a balance between, or a mixture. There's no one short answer. A mixture of, a very authoritarian sort of structure within the families that they're in which a male figure will be very authoritarian. This again a generalization. This is not all every single case. I can only generalize. I cannot sort of speak for every individual case, where there is this lack of religious understanding, but a feel that I have to fully control my children's affairs. And if I cannot fully control my children's affairs, then something is wrong with me. That's why we see these so-called honor killings, because there is no permissibility for any human to take the life of another human. God forbid that that person is taking the life of his own child, or his own niece, or his own, whatever, some female member in his family. There is no legislation within the Sharia whatsoever. So even though Islam is used in order to justify these steps, there is no Islamic justification whatsoever. Someone's at my front door. Anyway, so let them wait at the front door. Why would they ring me when they know I've got FiqHour? Clearly, they're not watching FiqHour, whatever it is. So anyway, where was I? Lost my train of thought. So you started to get these fractures occurring. Okay, this so-called Islamic justification to start to behave in this way. Young people are now, young women are now getting a lifestyle choice at home, and they're thinking, really, do I want this kind of lifestyle choice whereby I've got to marry some bloke that I've never met, that I do not connect with, that's from another country, that's maybe significantly older than me, not really, doesn't really rock my boat. Or the other option that I have here, which is that I can, study to be, I don't know, a midwife, or study to be a doctor, or study to be a teacher, or study to be, and I can make a change in society. So let me put that to the majority of the gentlemen that are watching here. Those choices aren't really choices, are they? Okay. Now, because the guise in which some of the chaps who are applying this authoritarian structure are saying this is Islamic, and the young lady knows no better, then she starts to be repulsed towards Islam. So many sisters that I've talked to, goodness me, clearly I can't speak English. Many sisters that I have talked to over the decades that I've been involved in working with the community, you find that either they've been affected by some level of abuse from a husband, or they've been affected by some level of abuse from a father figure, or an uncle figure, or an older brother figure, which has been dressed up in the guise of Islam. And as a result, they now throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they have an issue against the whole concept of a patriarchal system, because they say the patriarchal system is not being fair, it's being oppressive. And also they then have a whole issue about Islam generally. And that leads to where we now get to the whole concept of this so-called Islamic feminism. because they want to still identify as Muslims. The issue is they don't, once they do some research and do some understanding, they think, actually, you know what? My faith doesn't dictate any of this. My faith allows me to pray. My faith allows me to do this, and my faith allows me to do that. So there's this kind of ownership of this, to try to say that actually it's not my faith that's doing it, it's these individuals who are involved in my life that are making this situation come upon me. However, what tends to happen is what is going on within the wider society, as we go back to, remember the history, quick potted history I gave you of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. So even this concept of, you know, women sort of standing up for themselves because, you know, men don't. For example, they'll say that you know, women footballers are getting paid less than male footballers. Women actresses, I think they call themselves actors now, are getting paid less than male actors. Women tennis players were getting less than male tennis players. So the argument that was being made is that the only reason we're getting less is because we're women. And therefore, we need to stand up for ourselves. And we need to say that this is not going to be acceptable. Similar like newscasters, you know, and there was a lot of going on, like the BBC. There was a big thing going on at the BBC that why is it that a man who's doing exactly the same job as a woman is getting paid significantly more? What's going on here? Is this only due to her gender? Is it only because she's a woman that she's getting less? Now, I'm pretty sure employers will argue and say, well, you know, somebody like Gary Lineker, for example, is a known face. Everybody knows his face. Everybody, you know, he's been in front of the camera for whatever 30, 40 years since he was a footballer, so everybody recognizes him. So that's why we pay him more rather than, I don't know, any sort of female broadcasters, but you know, whoever is the other female broadcaster equivalent to Gary Lineker, she's only come into the media for the last 10, 15 years, and she's not really known at the kind of level that Gary Lineker, so that's why we pay him more. So these kind of arguments were made. However, the push was so strong that the justification had to be made at every single time. So with this kind of mindset now that exists, okay, that, oh, hold on, we start to look at Islam. So keep that kind of thinking on, and we now start to look at Islam, and you will see that there's many aspects within Islam in which it differentiates based on the gender. There's no two ways of looking at this. You know, we're not going to be apologetic here. There are ways in which the gender responsibilities are different. For example, the man is supposed to provide for the woman. Just because he is a man, it's his responsibility to provide for a woman. So even if the woman is earning 50 grand a year and the man is earning 25 grand a year, the man has to provide for the woman. Of course, common sense should prevail, and the woman should say, look, you know, you're not on that much. Why don't I also provide towards a house? And he can say, that's completely up to you. Okay. But from a Sharia perspective, it's not her legal responsibility to do so. She does it out of choice. She does it out of ihsan. Okay. So therefore, only because he's a bloke, nothing to do with how much he's earning, his level of education, his age, nothing to do with that. All it is simply because he was born a man, he has that responsibility upon him. And likewise, he has the ability to initiate divorce. Okay. So he has the ability to initiate divorce. And we also find that when it comes to inheritance, that the male gets 2 shares compared to the female. And the reason why the male gets 2 shares is exactly what I explained to you earlier. Let me give you a mathematical conundrum. If, for example, a man dies, okay, and he has a son called Abdullah and a daughter called Fatima, and Abdullah is married with 3 kids, and Fatima is married with 3 kids. So Abdullah is going to get 20 grand because his father's passed, so he gets 20 grand. And his sister, his married sister, is going to get 10 grand. So on the face of it, it looks like, oh, goodness me, the sister's only getting 10 grand, but the brother's getting 20 grand. But allow me to explain. That brother now has to use that 20 grand to support himself, support his wife, and support his 3 children. So if he equally distributes it, they get 4 grand each. So he only gets 4 grand. Whereas the woman who gets his married sister, gets 10 grand, she doesn't have to spend it on her husband. She doesn't need to spend it on her 3 children. So she keeps 10 grand. So when you look at it, you think, actually, she's getting more than the man is getting. Okay. So she's getting 10 grand to herself, and he's only getting 4 grand to himself. So you start to see that division. When it comes to imamat, leading prayer, is a male imam that leads the prayer, not a female imam that leads the prayer. When you have usually the rooms are separate, but if, for example, the rooms were not separate, then the men would be obliged to fill the first safs and the women would be obliged to fill the safs at the back. So again, there's that difference that's being made there. When you see, for example, war, the soldiers, the mujahideen, would be men, not women. So with this so-called Islamic feminism that's coming in now, women are saying, well, actually, you know what? We want that full equality. If a man can issue divorce, a woman can issue a divorce as well. If a man gets twice as many shares, then a woman should get this equal shares. And I guess by extension, a man can marry 4 women. I guess then from an Islamic feminism perspective, they will say, well, okay, I won't use the word Islamic feminism from a feminism because it's not an appropriate phrase. I only used it because it was suggested, but now I'm going to correct it and just use the phrase feminist. So from a feminist perspective, they will say, well, okay, we should also be able to marry 4 men. It's equality, isn't it? And a Muslim man can potentially theoretically marry a Christian, practicing Christian, or a believing Christian woman, or a believing Jewish woman. So similarly, it will be argued from a feminist perspective that a Muslim woman should also be able to marry a believing Christian man or a believing Christian Jew. So that's the issue. However, and this is the big however, there is a fundamental difference between feminism and obviously Islam. Islam has come to us not because men sat down and made up some laws. Islam, like the way feminism has come about with women sitting down and arguing for equality in being treated exactly the same, but rather a revealed text from Allah. It is our belief which makes us Muslims in the first place, that Allah has revealed this text. Our Creator has revealed this text. And it is our belief that this text has not been modified. So if it is our belief that Allah has revealed this text, who is our Creator, if that's our belief, and it's our belief that this text has not changed, then in order to continue to be a Muslim, we have to accept that it is Allah who has said that the male should get 2 shares compared to the female. It is Allah who has given the right of divorce to the man and not to the woman. It is if you look at all the Anbiya, it is Allah who chose all the Anbiya to be men. So therefore, it's not that we're arguing or women should be arguing with men, but rather it's a case that in reality, women are arguing with Allah. That why is it, in essence, that you didn't give us the same responsibility? If we go back to, like I said, back to the 50s and 60s, when we saw this huge increase in illicit relationships, which came around the same time as the morning after pill was introduced, this all came about because of intermingling. But then somebody has to work, somebody has to earn for the family. So the way Islam has suggested it via Allah is that the man does that. Okay, because the man isn't required to be around a child. The man is not going to be pregnant for 9 months. The man is not going to be required to feed his baby. The man is required and is physically made stronger, because if we want true equality, then when we have the 100 meters sprint, in which we have the likes of Usain Bolt, I don't know who does it nowadays, but we used to have Usain Bolt, then women should also line up alongside the men if we're going to have absolute equality. But that would never happen. Why? Because men are, generally speaking, faster than women. Similarly, when there's boxing, you're never going to see a male boxer in the same weight category as a female boxer. That is never going to happen. Why? Because men are generally stronger than women. So there is an absolute acceptance. And now we're seeing, with this transgender thing, that there's many women who are actually saying, actually, we don't like this kind of transgender thing, because what's happening is men are changing into women or claiming that they are now women. They're entering into our sports and they're winning. So now the whole reason why we had our separate section for sports was so that at least women could come first, second, and third. But now we're getting men who are becoming transgender coming into our sports, and now they're coming first, second, and third. So we can't even win. We can't even win the women's section in our athletics. And one was so ironic, was a transgender male who became female won the women's beauty contest in a country somewhere. I can't remember what it was. So it's ajib that men are now beating women in looking like women. You know, you just cannot make that stuff up. You know, you just cannot make that stuff up. That's the world we're living in right now. So I hope that that I have generally, obviously it's a 25, 20 minutes, 30 minutes that I've spoke for, that I've generally answered the concerns and the queries that exist. I'm just going to go back to the theme that was suggested, analyzing interpretations of Islamic texts and traditions. I've done that. The struggle by gender equality of Muslims, I've done that. And the role of women in Islamic religious and intellectual history, I've done that. Okay, so that has been pretty much covered in detail. We know, for example, now we live in a different world. Okay, we live in a different world. So you will see, for example, that in the workplace there will be Muslim women and obviously Muslim men. We're seeing that now, even within the charity sector, in the council. You know, you'll see a lot of Muslims applying for jobs in the service sector, whether that's in hospitals, whether that's in GP practices, banks, call centers, whatever. You're seeing a lot of Muslim men and women working together now. So the issue comes now is, what do we do as Muslim men, as Muslim women? Okay, what do we do now? And I just wanted to one last point as well. Another reason why you find that Muslim women are sort of standing up for themselves is, unfortunately, Muslim men don't behave like real men. That's another issue. I want to make that point. I don't want to make it too one-sided, is that Muslim men don't behave like men. It is a man's responsibility to be a khadim to his family, to serve his family. It's, your house is your little business. Yeah, it's your little business. And you are the CEO if you're a man. If you're the father or if you're the husband, you're the CEO. Okay. And you have a vice CEO or a deputy CEO, which is your wife. And then you have your staff, which are your children. Okay. Now, it's your job to maintain harmony and peace in that house. Now, if you want to become a dictator and you just want to shout and scream and bawl and act like some kind of hard case, like some tough guy, that you want to keep everybody in line by shouting and screaming at them, then ain't nobody going to like you. Okay. No one's going to. And in fact, what's going to happen is they're going to have hatred towards you. And there is no way you're going to influence them to do anything. And in fact, that becomes the cause. So many women, for example, their husbands are, drinking alcohol, going gambling, spending money on other women. So this poor sister doesn't have enough to feed her own children. She has to hide her purse because he wants the child benefit to gamble. So what does she do? How does she feed her kids? So she then goes out to get a job. So we don't know the reason why some of our sisters are out there working. It might not be as some of the chaps perceive it, or she's a bit free. She wants to get out there. She doesn't want to be a good Muslim sister and, sit at home and let her husband work. You don't know her story. So let's not be judgmental. There could be 101 reasons why that poor sister, out of, not out of choice, is now out there. Another reason could be, for example, is that she's got married to somebody abroad. And in order to fulfill his case, in order to bring him over to this country, she's going to need a job. And if the Conservatives are going to have their way, she needs to be earning like 38 grand or something a year in order to bring her chap over. So there are so many reasons now why Muslim sisters might be out in the workplace. And as I said, we shouldn't be judgmental. We don't know what the reason is, and we should just let things be. It's not our issue. Our issue is our own business, yani our own family. So as I said, let's get back to the fact that we're in a working place and there's Muslim sisters there and there's us. Now, obviously, our job is that we just keep the communication absolutely formal and on a need as basis. There is no need for chit chat. There is no need for humor. There is no need for jokes. There is no need for gupshup. There is no need to start asking personal questions, how things at home or whatever. None of your business. Okay, you're not an Agonian, you're not a scholar that's going to give some spiritual. And if the sister starts talking to you like that, then say, sister, my apologies if I've come across like that, but please, I'm not interested in that. You need to find somebody else to discuss this with, but not with me. Thank you very much. And that's it. You don't have to be cold and heartless and ruthless, but you do set up your barrier to make it quite clear. And similarly, sisters, if Muslim brothers are starting talking to you in that way, then say, with all due respect, my brother, we work here. We're going to have to obviously communicate with each other when we're passing tasks on to each other, but that's about it. There's no need for formal, informal gupshup. There's no need to ask me how my evening went. There's no need to ask me about what I'm doing this evening. Doesn't really matter. It's not part of our job. So let's just keep it civil and respectful. And that's how it should be. And in fact, that's now the type of advice that the Me Too people are suggesting, with people in the workplace about what is considered as sexual misconduct, as to what is considered as inappropriate conversations. And we're just seeing, what's his name, the Formula One guy, Charlie Horner, I think it is, with Red Bull. Who was supposedly, allegations were made that he was speaking or behaving inappropriately with a female staff member. So this happens, okay? This happens and is going on. And this is always because the two genders are now working together for the various reasons that I've spoke about. Alhamdulillah. I think that has at least give you some broad idea of the complicated nature of where we are and how we are, and inshallah how we're supposed to navigate in these circumstances. Let's pick up some questions. Actually, before we pick up the live questions, no, let's do the live questions, because I've got a few that I need to do from the Dar Iftar. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. I got a reply from the institute saying that the purchase of the book was not a salam transaction and I purchased in credit. Does buying the book from the institute in credit, which they had to order in, make this sale valid? I'm not sure what that means, that you bought it in credit. Did they have the book? If they had the book, then yes, you can buy it in credit. Absolutely. But if they didn't have the book and they made the sale, that's what I don't understand. This is, we've discussed this at length, sister. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Theme idea. Oh, mashallah. 4 schools of fiqh. What are they and how they became popular? The reason for this question is because a friend told me he doesn't follow a school of fiqh. The way he finds ruling is by taking the most common opinion amongst the 4 schools. But he's not a person. He's not a person. Your friend is not a person. Subhanallah. What kind of a friend do you have, brother? What is he, like a jinn? You have a jinn friend? What's going on? What kind of people tune into my fiqh hours? Oh, no, I meant he isn't a scholar. Well, you're saying only scholars are people and non-scholars are not people, Hamza. Subhanallah, brother. Easy with those kind of statements. You're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. Anyway, he's not a person or a student of knowledge. Okay, so he's not a scholar, I think, what the brother is saying, or a student of knowledge. So is there a way to explain it? Why is it important to follow one of the schools of fiqh? Also, should you just follow the one you were born into? Are you allowed to give? Okay, so if you could, Hamza, just copy and paste that and send it to me. Okay, that would be nice, because otherwise I'm gonna have to write all that down, and that's just going to be too much for me to write all that down. Okay, are you allowed? Yeah, everybody seems to have my WhatsApp number, Hamza. The other day, Haris, with his Jazakallah very insightful, WhatsApp me. So I asked him, I said, Haris, how do you manage to get my number? He kept that quiet. He didn't. Oh, he says, oh, I was on the group and I got it from the group. And then I said, okay, but when I checked him, I said, Haris, you're not even on the group. So how did you do that? Oh, yeah, Haris, you can give me your ha-has, eh? You're on the group chat as well. Is that where you get my number from? Chalo, inshallah. But Haris wasn't on it when I checked him. I thought, hold on, let me just check this guy. How did he manage to get my number? I was just more curious. I wasn't, angry or anything. I just thought, how's he done this? Oh, number 4. Oh, you're on number 4, are you? You're not made it to number 1 yet, have you, Hamza? Oh, mashallah. There's only foundation 1, 2, 3, and 4. The originals are always the best ones, aren't they, Hamza? Anyway, let's go back to the. Oh, he needs this. Oh, look at Iman coming in. Years of work, Hamza. Years of work, dedication, hard work, and inshallah, one day you'll get there. Anyway, where were we? Okay, are you allowed to give Are you allowed to give money, sadaqah, to a person who you are unsure on whether they will use it good or bad? Will it be sinful if he uses the money for haram? No, you always, Hamza, you go with ghalibul dhan. Okay, the way we operate is either bil yaqeen or ghalibul dhan. Either you are certain, okay, you are certain. Yani, you see the guy, he's scratching, he looks like he's a junkie, and he's tripping, you can tell he's cold turkeying, he's looking for a next shot, he's looking for a rap, and you think, okay, I'm not going to give it to this guy because I'm pretty sure that this guy is going to use it for that. But if he's like an average guy and you don't know one way or the other, then there's no harm on you there. So if it's yaqeen, okay, he's literally saying, give me some money because I want to buy a lottery ticket. Okay, then you know. Or he says, give me some money, brother, I need to buy a drink from the pub. Then you know, okay, say no thanks. Okay, but if he says, brother, I need some money, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need to drink it, then you can't say rip open his heart and say, oh, actually, yeah, okay, you're gonna go with ghalibul dhan. Fine, there you go. Okay. Wa alaikum salam. Iman, mashallah, Iman, may Allah bless him, has joined with us as a volunteer, the only one so far. Which reminds me, I need to send you the volunteer link, which is what I said I would do. Just give me a second. Where is the old volunteer link? It's not there. And it is here. I said, come on, see, that I would send the volunteer link every day on our chat. So please, as Iman has done, Sim, he's filled the form in. Come on, and when you fill the form in, we can have sister volunteers as well as male volunteers. My wife personally looks after the sister volunteers, so please, feel free. Mashallah, Hamza, mashallah. Okay. Yes, mashallah, I heard, Iman. Okay, we've got your details, Iman. I'm speaking to my colleague who deals with the fiqh and social media side, because you said you wanted to kind of give a little bit of a little bit work in that area, and eventually you'll come on to the charity side. So inshallah, he will be in touch with you shortly. We have all your details, so don't worry about that. Okay, next one. Feminist ideologies can be liberating for some Muslims, 100%. And that's a very valid point, and that's a point I wanted to make in my lecture. Well, not lecture, but little blurb that I did previously, that yes, it can be seen as very liberating. But this is the other thing. Coming out of the servitude of Allah feels like liberating. Why does it feel liberating? Because you don't have to keep a beard. I can keep a goatee. I can shave it off. I can paint it pink. I can do this. I can do that. Oh, it's so liberating. Okay. Similarly, I don't have to get it for Fajr. I don't have to fast in the month of Ramadan. Oh, so liberating. I can eat pork. I can drink alcohol. Yani, a person thinks that this is liberating. Okay. But what he's actually doing is he's coming out of the servitude of Allah, but he's becoming a slave of his own ego. He just doesn't see it yet. And the ego is a very difficult thing to please. The ego is a very difficult thing to please. The ego will have you jumping left, right, and center. Left, right, and center. We've seen how 1960s we had that sexual kind of explosion where suddenly just having intimacy with your wife or your husband was no longer the norm. Now this freedom, this liberation, this freedom to do what you want, people thought, yeah, it's a good thing. Now look where it's led to. The legitimization of intimacy between a man and a man, the legitimization to have intimacy between a woman and a woman. And now you're seeing these people changing from one gender to another, considering themselves to be gender fluid, wants to be referred to as they. You're seeing all this confusion. Now imagine a child growing up in that environment. When I was growing up as a kid, there were boys and there were girls. And life was so simple, and what happened was, there was a boy and there was a girl. And then when you reached to an age of marriage, you married one of them and they became a woman and you became a man. And then you had children and that was life. Now, imagine a kid with all these various options, and yes, it might seem so-called liberating, but it's confusing, and it leads, unfortunately, to a state of depression. And that's another point I wanted to raise, is as we've had this so-called liberation, depression has gone way up. Okay. Now you ask that average working woman, are you enjoying your life? Because guess what, sisters? The brother at home, he did not pick up the slack when you went and started working. So not only now does a woman get up first thing in the morning, do as much around the house as she can, off to work, and then pick up the kids or whatever. Then she comes back from work, and then she's carrying on doing whatever she can do around the house, and she's going to sleep at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And she's thinking, what am I doing this for? Is the husband going to help me? He's not going to help. So what they do is, and they think, well, I don't need him. What use is he to me? Especially now when we live in this liberated society, that a woman doesn't even need a man anymore for intimacy. Before, at least a woman would say, Chelo, okay, is this, that, or the other, but at least I need him for intimacy. And a man would say, okay, she's this, that, and the other, but at least I need her for intimacy. Now he's saying, oh, you don't need a husband or a wife for intimacy. It's free, liberating. Have intimacy with whoever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. And that's destroying that structure of society. Also quite strange how our stance on women was considered liberal, progressive essentially back, and today we're labeled. Absolutely. That's just the way society moves, Iman. What's the volunteering options? The volunteering options are a number, Hamza. One is obviously there's a lot of work that can be done with my Q&A. Similarly, there's a lot of work that can be done on our social media. We have a number of social media platforms. And thirdly, we have obviously a number of projects within the Olive Lantern Trust. The website is there. So you can support by doing some kind of fundraising as well. You don't have to literally have a little stall and buy and sell. You'll get a specific link and you can share that with your family and friends. And over the Ramadan period, collect zakat, collect sadaqah, collect lillah. The more we have, the better, Hamza. You don't need any skills. You can type, you can read, you can learn. If a person who thinks they are a Sahib Tartib misses Fajr 3 days in a row, then do they have to wait for 3 full days of Salah before making up the missed Salah, or do they just wait for 1 day? They just wait for 1 day. It's gotten to the point, that's very American, it's gotten, I don't think gotten is in English, to the point where I've heard people ask if animals are able to consent. Or you will hear all sorts of craziness. You know, you'll hear all sorts of, the next thing will, unfortunately, astaghfirullah, be pedophilia and things like that. It's just really a matter of time, because I can't see how the age of consent would stay as high as it is right now. The age of consent will change, because it just does not make any sense that the way the liberating societies are going, that the age of consent will stay as it was 30 years ago, 50 years ago, when there's such huge changes. And the fact that conversations about this sort of stuff is going on in primary schools, and for folk like me, we never heard those conversations in primary schools. And obviously our parents never discussed those things. Our parents didn't even show affection towards each other in front of their children. They have married husband and wives that never showed no affection. They didn't even hold hands or kind of look at each other. So we were kind of, away from all of that until you become an age of marriage. Now young, babies are kind of being, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds are being kind of, discussing these things, and, encourage, before, like if you wore your sister's clothes, trust me, you'd know about it. You'd get your face knocked into next week. But nowadays, if a boy wears his sister's clothes, he'll be encouraged. Okay, he'll be encouraged. But we were discouraged. And we were told about certain norms, about this is like this and this is like that. Should we show affection to our partners in front of our children? I would say no. I don't think they should be. There should be something. There should be something. Obviously, I think children need to see that, my dad and mum are happily married. They need to see that. So marriage is successful. If they see mum and dad always arguing, then the children are going to think, okay, that doesn't look like a nice relationship. That's why I always say, it's always interesting, isn't it, when people say, oh, was it a love marriage or was it an arranged marriage? I always think, why did they say that? It's like suggesting that arranged marriage has no love in it. Yeah. And only when you marry your girlfriend that there's love in it. Of course not. There's love in an arranged marriage. There's more love in an arranged marriage because it's pure love. Whereas in a so-called love marriage, as it's referred to, there is lust. because it's lust which has driven those people together. It wasn't love that drew those people together. Whereas an arranged marriage is going to be more pure, it's more clean. So yes, of course, there should be some level of affection shown and demonstrated, but there's a way of doing it. Okay, there's a way of doing it. Okay, let me just pick up those questions that I needed to do before I forget. Let's just pick this. Does a general anesthetic break the fast? It depends, because what happens with a general anesthetic is, even though it might be injected in, usually in the hand, they also put a pipe into the mouth, okay, in order to keep you breathing and all the rest of it. And they sometimes lubricate that. That's why you might find when you wake up, your teeth might hurt. And as they're pulling that pipe back out, they sometimes clip your teeth as it's coming out. And they lubricate that. So when they lubricate that, that will be a means of a fast breaking due to that lubrication going past the throat. So it's not necessarily the anesthetic which is being applied in your hand, but it's more the pipe that's put in to assist your breathing. If a piece of food less than a chickpea size caught in the teeth dislodges itself and one could have expelled but swallowed, would that break the fast? According to my understanding of the mas'ala, it does not break the fast if it is smaller than a chickpea that was dislodged. However, obviously, I would refrain from swallowing anything, edible or inedible, that is in the mouth. However, as I said, if this has made its way into the mouth unintentionally, it's in there without one realizing it, and it dislodges and swallows, then there seems to be, from the mas'ala that I read, that it does not invalidate the fast. That is that. Assalamu alaikum. Is it permissible to use a fertility lubricant for intercourse that is required to be inserted internally using a plastic applicator? Yes, the reason why, because you need it for medicinal purposes. It's not necessarily for in order to excite the person, and therefore it should be. And if there's any doubt or any hesitancy, then a husband can apply it. And therefore it can be seen as valid from that perspective. Because didn't the Prophet ﷺ do that like a balance, not too cultural and strict? Also, like, what's the harm in mom and dad holding hands or hugging from time to time? There is no harm. Absolutely, there is no harm. Because, as I said, it just shows affection that exists, and what the children, especially the young children, need to see is love. One thing which is missing in our houses that I've noticed is a lack of love. Just generally, just having love there, nice talk, caring, cuddling. I'm not talking about the mom and daddy. I'm talking about, with the kids and everything as well. Because there's just too much shouting. There's too much aggression. There's too much, it's a bad environment that we've made, unfortunately. We just need to make a loving environment where, taking the mick out one another. Children should feel confident to be able to say even the most stupid things in front of their parents. And the parents can then give confidence, and that's what builds self-confidence, self-esteem. One of the things we destroy for young children is self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-belief. Once you take those away, it doesn't matter what you do, you have destroyed that child. You've destroyed that child. But if you can teach self-belief, if you can teach self-esteem, and let the child value themselves, they'll avoid, why most of the time our young children do crazy things out there? It's because they don't value themselves. Why don't they value themselves? Because they weren't valued as children. So they all develop this lack of self-worth. You don't find in well-to-do areas, teenagers do crazy things. We know that. In all societies, teenagers, the way their brain works and the dopamine hits that they like, they will do crazy things. But you find that in our society, we heard that, for example, in Birmingham, where that lad was parked up and somebody just hit him at the back going at some silly speed. And that's not the first, and that's definitely not going to be the last. And you're going to hear stories like that on a weekly basis of it happening. Why? Because that's self-worth. We need to value our children, and they will value themselves, and they will not put themselves in harm's way. But if we don't show that kind of love and affection to children, they will not have any self-worth, and therefore they will do crazy things because they don't value whether they're alive or dead. Okay, don't know why that thumbs up came, because it wasn't a thumbs up kind of thing. One brother got a non-Muslim girl pregnant. Does she count as Ahlul Kitab? I don't even know who the woman is, so how can I answer that? Or what does he do? What does he do? What do you mean, what does he do? He's already done what he did. What can he do now? Should that love not stem from the parents? That's where it comes from, Haris. It comes from the parents. The parents are, the parents aren't here just to teach us, how to, tie our shoelaces, go to the toilet, use a tissue. It's supposed to teach us these feelings and emotions. That's why, unfortunately, we behave in the manner that we behave. We lack self-awareness. We become so selfish. Okay, that's why, our parking is the way it is. Like outside a masjid, you're going to worship Allah and you block someone in. Ajib, eh? How a person can think like that. I'm going to go pray to Allah. I'm going to say, oh, Allah, accept my du'as, but I'm going to block this brother in. Okay, I'm going to block this brother in. And then this brother comes out, he's got to go. He's got to go to, he's a doctor on call, and he's got his little beeper, whatever method that doctors get called nowadays is going off. So he finishes his fard, he's out there. He goes, Lalaji's parked his car, blocking him in. But he's got to get to the hospital. Something's happened with one of his patients, and there's an emergency. He's got to get in. Now he stood outside the masjid, waiting. This Hazrat has decided to start having a bit of a chit-chat with some of the lads that he hasn't seen since last week. But by the time he comes out, he's saying, yeah, 15 minutes. By the time he gets there, that person's passed away. But it's our self-awareness, looking at the needs for others, not blocking people's drives, not, putting people in harm's way. This is about being taught not to be selfish. We don't teach these skills about sharing, about giving, inculcating these, discussing these with our children. Oh, look what you did there. Was that something good you did? And analyzing it with our children. Why is it not good? And, they start to understand, oh, it's not good because now that person is crying. And did you make that person cry? Yes. Is crying a good thing? No. What did you do that caused that person to cry? Oh, because I took their toy, or I was playing with it and I didn't let them play with it. Right. But couldn't you play with it and then let them play with it and you play with something else? Yeah, I could do that. Would that make that person stop crying? Yes, it would. Would it make them happy? Yes, it would. Now, there you go. Now, this child, when they become an adult, will naturally have that awareness. But if we don't bring those kind of qualities in, how is that going to happen? Anyway, on that point, it is 8:01. We are going to depart tomorrow. Oh, hold on, before we do depart. Tomorrow we've run out of hadises. So we're going to read this anonymous person who sent me them. I wonder who this person is. Allahu A'lam. It says his name is Hamza on here. SubhanAllah, how did he manage to get my number? I wonder how. He must have just sat there and it must have fallen in his lap. So tomorrow's, inshallah, theme is the 4 schools of fiqh. What are they? And how have they become so popular? And the reason for the question is, the reason is we will explore, but the question is that we are going to explore this topic because now some people may think that the 4 schools of law are somewhat redundant. Why don't we just pick the easiest option out of all of them and apply that? Why don't we pick the one where there's some level? We live in a democratic society, so why don't we let democracy rule the show and select the one in which there's 4 schools? So whenever we see a 3-1, we'll take the ones which is 3. And that will make sure that we're following the majority. Surely that makes logical sense and that makes democratic sense. And that's what we should do. And then we can ask questions like, for instance, why can't we just take rulings from the most common? Why can't we take the rulings, the ones which the hadith is mentioned in Bukhari? Why can't we just follow Why is it important to follow one school of fiqh? And why do you have to follow the school of fiqh that you were born in? Why can't you just pick one later date? So that's the theme for tomorrow, inshallah, and those will be the questions. So jazakumullah khairan to you all, and until tomorrow, wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Forgot to say, which is what I normally say, please do share the video, and also invite others to connect so that more people can take benefit. You will get the ajr for it. And similarly, as Ramadan is approaching, many people are going to be practicing Islam for the first time or after a long time. So they're going to have lots of questions. They're going to have lots of queries. Okay. Mr. MFJSIZFC, don't retract your messages, because as I've told you before, people see these questions. If you don't like the questions, don't ask them, but don't retract them. Otherwise, I will refuse to answer your questions, my brother. Follow the rules. Listen to Ustaji. Don't get Ustaji upset. Till tomorrow, gentlemen. Wa akhiru da'wana. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.